Uh, Now, I would like to acknowledge here at the start that is not the case. While I'm quite interested in the question, not only do I not really have an answer to it, but there are also likely a number of you joining in this conversation that have a far more developed understanding of how to go about answering this question than that I have. So I think this is important to state so that my role here is clear. I invite us into a conversation together where we inquire into the question, what does it mean to live a philosophical life? And we can learn from one another. So while I start off by suggesting a few things that I hope will serve the function of an invitation to address this together, I would also like to invite us to use the shared whiteboard to begin thinking about your own responses. And I'll open up that in just one moment. So you might write on there some aspect of what it is to live, but also something drew you to this question as you were just mentioning. And you might feel like there's something that you'd like to say more about that. And then we could see how that connects to living philosophically. So I'm going to open that shared whiteboard now just so you can see it and then talk you through a little bit about just its functionality. So hopefully you can all see a thing that says, what does it mean to live a philosophical life, and a blank space. So in order for us to utilize this well, I want to be clear how you can write on it. So on your top panel, you should see something that says View Options. And if you click on View Options and scroll down to Annotate, that should allow you to write on this shared whiteboard, and everyone else will be able to see what you write. Now, there's one sort of odd thing about this functionality, which is once you've clicked something and clicked off of it and made it show, I don't think you can edit again what you've written. I think only I have the ability to edit again what you've written. Well, that's what it is. So make a commitment to. So I hope this tool proves helpful to our conversation rather than a hindrance as a consequence of its novelty to some of you, but just do the best. If necessary, you can ask something in the chat, and either me or Cassie or someone else will be able to help you figure out how to use this thing. So I encourage you to, as I do a little more introduction, start writing your thoughts on there about what you think it is to live a philosophical life. Just test it out, put things on there. Someone want to test one just to make sure it's functioning and I haven't set something up wrong, so it's not allowing you to write on there. So again, the way you access it is view, be curious. Great. So I see at least some people have figured out how to use it. So again, ask in the chat if you have more questions about making that work. So as you start to write some things on there, before we go further with this question, what does it mean to live a philosophical life? I thought I ought to acknowledge an assumption embedded in the question, that it is possible to live philosophically. In the foreword to Philosophy as a Way of Life, Ancients and Moderns, Essays in Honors of Pierre Hadot, John Spencer writes, "The profession of philosophy has generally eschewed the idea of the philosophical life." So I think it's important to acknowledge before we proceed with thinking about what it means to live philosophically, that the basis for this question, that philosophy is something that can be lived, is itself disputed among philosophers. Something else perhaps obvious, implicit in the formulation of the question, is that living philosophically is distinct from living other sorts of ways. There are other adjectives we might use to contrast our lives with how others live. Perhaps I could say I live a frugal life, or I live a politically engaged life. It may or may not be that a philosophic life is like those other ways to describe one's life as distinct from others. But all I mean to suggest is that not all people live philosophic lives. So who does? In their article, What It Takes to Live Philosophically, or How to Progress in the Art of Living, Caleb Coho and Stephen Grimm suggest that those who are making progress in their actions and understanding are already living philosophically. And I'm going to put that onto the whiteboard, assuming it lets me do it. Yeah. So that's rather than a philosophical life being strictly a superlative achievement. In other words, they suggest that it's not only the great philosophers who have written seminal works of philosophy or founded philosophic traditions who qualify as living philosophic lives. I think this is significant because as a consequence of this view, rather than looking at a philosophical life as something complete, and so our task together in this inquiry might seem to be to create an idealized image of a philosopher, in contrast to that, we can see the sorts of practices, attitudes, habits, and so forth that make up a philosophic life as contributing to the progress of those engaged in them. And our inquiry together could be an attempt to elaborate on those elements of a philosophic life. I know that's a long thought, but I hope the distinction is clear there. So that's not to say I'm opposed to the imagining an ideal philosopher approach, or to say that the two approaches may not turn out to be significantly linked, especially insofar as the idealized philosopher may have to always be making further progress. But I rather want to offer this distinction in the hopes it helps clarify the path we are making in our inquiry together. One other potential problem we may run into is if there are a variety of philosophical lives with quite different, even conflicting elements to them, or if all philosophical lives have certain elements in common. Okay, so living philosophically is something perhaps questionable. Living philosophically is something distinctive from other ways of living. Living philosophically is something that may involve making progress in one's actions and understanding, or may represent an ideal. And living philosophically is something that might be one thing, or might be many things. Okay, all that still begs the question, what does it mean to live a philosophical life? With that, I'd like to shift into hearing some of your thoughts. Some of you have already, I noticed, posted some things on the whiteboard. So I encourage you to either jump in and elaborate on something you shared, or something else, something you noticed that someone else has shared. And now we'll proceed with an inquiry together into this question. And so that means you can challenge each other, agree with what someone said, disagree with someone said, identify premises behind what someone said, all that good stuff. So